It's good to see you.
On a 70-degree Friday in St. Louis in January.
You could not have asked for better weather. I just hope I would love for it to stay this way, but not likely. So
no, it'd be very confusing for everything too. Trees and everything else. You couldn't stand much of this, but we probably won't have much of it. So it'll all work out.
Yeah, it'll all work out in the end. So you guys, the Senate had really, the 113th Congress Senate, you guys have really just started the new session off, being dropped essentially in a pot of hot water here. You have all of the nominations coming through. You have Hagel, you have Brennan, you have Lieu. We have the discussions on gun control, which is happening. We have the financial battles, which are happening. I want to first get into some of these nominations, especially Chuck Hagel, because this is something we're seeing. Really, it's odd. I think there is as much Democrat opposition as there is Republican opposition to someone like Chuck Hagel. What do you think of the president's selections for his cabinet here?
Well, we'll see what happens with Chuck Hagel. I didn't serve with him. He left the Senate in 1990. In 2009, came to Senate about 1990, and amazingly, Dana, 42 of the members of the Senate came after he left in January 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So in a body you think never changes, the Senate of the United States, 42 of the 100 members never served in the Senate with a guy who left in January 2009. I know him from having been in the Congress with him a little bit. I'm surprised, frankly, that the president wanted to take on this fight this early, but if you read Charles Krauthammer and any number of other conservative columnists, they're saying, well, it's because he shares the president's vision for the military, and we'll see if he does or not. He is truly a military hero. He and his brother enlisted men in Vietnam in a really unusual story, serving together. At one point, he saved his brother's life after he'd already been wounded. So there's a lot of admirable things to say about Chuck Hagel. I'm on the Armed Services Committee now.
Yes, and you're going to be questioning him.
And I'll be at that front line of those questions. And so the one thing I have said, he's called last week to talk on the phone. And I thought, what, I'd be glad to see you when you can come by. So come by. And, Iran is something I'd be very concerned about.
Exactly.
Attitude is how he wants to explain statements he's made about our relationship with Israel, and the government of Israel would be at the top of my list to be things to be concerned about. But I want to talk to him about that. I'm on this committee. I want to give him a fair hearing. And normally, I think the president deserves some leeway in people that are going to leave when he leaves, more leeway than in judges who are going to be there forever. But there's a reason that the Senate is supposed to confirm these kinds of appointees, and so just because the president wants him doesn't mean the president's necessarily going to get him. But I'm looking forward to a chance to let him explain some things that I think there's some explaining to do.
Right. I think the president had smart strategy in essentially coming out with Hagel and Brennan at the same time, because everyone seems to be focused on Hagel more than Brennan. And out of the two, Brennan is the one who upsets me the most, I think, with his record. His essentially Benghazi happened on his watch. He's the counterterrorism advisor to the president, working with the Department of Homeland Security. Some of the things that he said, some of the actions that he's had in the past, I'll never forget the Christmas Day bombing over a year ago when he was on the Sunday talk show circuits after that happened, and he looked as though he was a deer in headlights. He had no idea what was happening in his own jurisdiction. He worries me. What are your thoughts on John Brennan as a nominee?
Well, I think you're exactly right that Brennan may have the distraction of Hagel may be helpful to the Brennan nomination. But I think Lindsey Graham made a really good point last week. I've been on the Intel committee. I'm leaving that committee to go on armed services in this Congress, and we can talk more about why I made that decision.
Yes, that is interesting.
If you want to. But I've been on the Intel committee, and I do think that this is the opportunity, and the one opportunity we may have to insist on some answers about Benghazi, about what the president knew, what he did in that 7 hours between the time that the ambassadors killed and the time 7 hours later, only 2 miles away, that those last two Americans are killed. So I'm not without concerns about this, and things that Brennan said after the killing of Osama bin Laden, the public kind of information that he was sharing. I'm not at all taking that nomination as if we shouldn't question it, because I think we should, and I think you're right in expressing some concern that you don't want Hagel to become such a decoy that Brennan slips through in ways that maybe he wouldn't in any other circumstance. I think there's some questions to answer there as well.
Brennan seems as though he would exacerbate the existing problems in the intel community. That's the kind of the perspective I have about it.
Well, and he's been on two different sides of these issues about interrogation, and frankly, I was more on the side he used to be on when he was involved before President Obama became president. Remember, the president talked about nominating Brennan to run the CIA 4 years ago.
And there was a lot of pushback.
Didn't. And there was a lot of pushback at that time because he'd been a person who appeared to want to justify some of the things that our government did to get information our government needed. But now he says, well, I was really never for that. That creates some concern for me.
Yeah. Do you kind of get the impression, too, that the president bringing on or nominating once again John Brennan, this seems to me as though an admission that the Bush doctrine is worked. How do you characterize that? That's kind of the impression I get.
Well, I think in many ways the use of drones that this president's been much more aggressive at than President Bush was. The fact that everybody that was at Guantanamo is still at Guantanamo. The fact that he is moving Brennan up, though I'm not sure where Brennan is on these issues, but 4 years ago I thought I knew where he was, and it was basically someone who'd been very supportive of the Bush policies post 9/11. You know, I saw something the other day. It was talking about the loneliness of one guy, this one guy, by the way, being Barack Obama, having to make the decision about whether to go after Osama bin Laden, and I was thinking, I wonder why I never hear this same kind of heart-wrenching story about the guy who was president on 9/11, where we had enemies all over the world that we were didn't have any idea how to deal with, and frankly, dealt with them pretty well, as it turned out, and kept America safe for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to stick around with us for another segment. We're going to take a quick break and come back with more discussion with Senator Roy Blunt. He's in studio with us. We're going to discuss the Russian adoption situation as well. I know several friends of mine who are kind of stuck in limbo with this situation, and Senator Blunt, this has affected him personally as well. Plus, the gun control issue, gun control mania. We're going to talk about that as well. Keep it right here, 866-455-9797. It's The Dana Show. We have more of your calls on the way. We are sitting here right now. Senator Roy Blunt is in studio with us, and he's been filling us in on all of the good, fun stuff that's that he has to look forward to.
None of it sounded very fun now that you think back. But being here with you in the studio is fun, so thanks for letting me come by.
Well, of course, it's nice to have you back in the state. I wanted to ask you, before we get into the gun control discussion, this is an issue that I know personally a number of families in the state of Missouri and friends who live elsewhere in the United States are dealing with in terms of adoption. Here we have this order that was signed by Vladimir Putin. They're going to ban Americans from adopting Russian children. Not only, like I said, does this affect many American families who are looking to adopt Russian children, but this hits close to home with you as well, because you did something like this, 6-7 years ago?
Well, we did. A little over 7, I guess about 7. Charlie's 8, our littlest boy Charlie's 8, and he was born in Russia and, spent either in a hospital or in an orphanage the first months of his life. And, this is once a family has identified a child, is the way this adoption works, that child becomes part of your family. Of course, what can you say about Vladimir Putin? I along with Mary Landrieu and 15 other senators, sent a letter to him 2 weeks before he signed the law, asking him not to sign the law. We passed a resolution that I sponsored the day he signed the law, criticizing Russia for using these kids there's 710,000 kids in Russian orphanages. 710,000. This is not about 700 or 800 kids or 7 or 8 kids. This is 710,000 kids in Russian orphanages, and there are thousands of American families that would like to adopt some of them. And, Dana, we've got one family from Missouri going on Sunday. The sort of glimmer of hope for at least a few families in the last 48 hours, was the Russians deciding yesterday that if the court has already said that this is your child and given you a date to pick it up, you can do that. Now, hasn't happened yet, as far as I know, but we've got a Missouri family going on Sunday to pick up a child on January the 15th. And we've got a St. Louis family who has a February date. And the way this now works, it wasn't the way it worked when we adopted our son Charlie, but the way it now works, you go to court, you get the final decision by the court, but they still put 30 more days in that, at least 30 days in that system, and they give you a date that says, okay, this is the time you can come back. And for those families, maybe, this is a process of seeing how far into the pool of kids and families is connected we can get. And that pool may be as deep as 700 or 800. And we know that the pool of adoptions in process is about 50. But these are including many families or some families who actually are like our Missouri family that's going on Sunday, who have a date, they bought a ticket, they've gone through all of the emotional highs and lows, and the ultimate emotional high of the court saying this is the day you can come back and pick up your child, and hopefully they'll get to do that.
Well, it was heartbreaking to read the headlines on that, especially when it just seemed to me as here Putin was punishing the children and trying to use one example to say that the thousands and thousands of adoptions that have taken place were somehow horrible. And it was sad. It was sad to see. Is there any hope that they could reverse this law or position?
Well, to see these kids used as political pawns is so sad, and it sort of is back to Vladimir Putin, KGB leader, instead of Vladimir Putin, what you would hope he might turn out to eventually be. They signed an agreement last November that said that the current Russia adoption laws couldn't change for a year without a year's notice. Well, let's do that. If you did that, many of these families and many of these kids, many of these kids have health problems too.
Right.
And Russian families either don't want to, or maybe even more reasonably and likely can't afford to do much about that. And American families are adopting kids that not only are in a bad day-to-day situation, but have a bad health situation that is in most cases correctable, and in all cases more can be done by this American family who's willing to adopt than will be able to be done by people
Russia.
Who are running the orphanage in Russia. That's exactly right.
The children get penalized.
And there are lots of Russian and Ukrainian kids in the St. Louis area, too.
Yes.
And, in fact, a big support group here for Russian and Ukrainian adoptees.
Which is great. I want to switch up the gears a little bit here and talk about gun control, because it's gun control mania. We've seen Senator Dianne Feinstein say she's going to introduce gun control legislation. You've heard Governor Andrew Cuomo giving the state of the state the other night, saying that we need to have we already have laws on the books about mental health checks and about the NCIS database and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on this? To me, it seems as though this is a little bit Overton window. We're going to have a discussion about confiscation and increased regulations just to get everyone riled up so that people can turn around and say, okay, well, we'll just settle for background checks on ammunition. What are your thoughts on this, the realistic advancement of it, and just generally?
Well, generally, I think that you ought to look at this problem. We all are concerned about it. Clearly when kids are the target at a school, again, I have a second grader. I have a bunch of grandchildren that are somewhere in the neighborhood of second grade as well. And it's a terrifying thing for any parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, older brother or sister. I said to several people the day of the Newtown incident, whatever you thought your problem was, your biggest problem was this morning, it probably wasn't that big a problem compared to what these 24 families are going through now, and we ought to be concerned about it. But mental health, looking at mental health in new ways is where I'd like to put my personal efforts. I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment, and things like what Dianne Feinstein wants to do in her bill. We tried that for 10 years. and it didn't appear to make a difference. So why don't we try something different?
Right.
You know, one of the things in common is sharing information, and whether it's Virginia Tech or the community college where Gabby Giffords was shot, or what happened in Newtown or Aurora, Colorado. I think in all cases, some law enforcement or security group in that community has said you can no longer come on this facility, but there's no way to share that information about someone. And also the federal government now, you know, pays states, in essence, to get people out of mental facilities and put them on the street.
Right.
And you don't want to keep people in mental facilities that shouldn't be there, but if you can help somebody solve that mental problem by keeping them in the hospital a little longer, they shouldn't be thrown out because the federal government says, oh, it's just, we'd rather pay half of the so-called community cost of having them wandering around than pay the Medicaid cost for having them in your hospital.
Exactly. Well, in the case with Loeffner, too, and that's a great example, because so many of the other cases are like his. Pima Community College, they barred him from coming back on the premises because they said he was mentally unfit. He had to get a clean bill of mental health, but yet no one communicated to, the Pima County Sheriff's Department. No one communicated. He was still able to purchase a firearm because no one communicated. And then even states are even slow to actually put people on that list of those who are barred from purchasing firearms, even after laws have been passed to incentivize them to act quicker. I mean, it's like, in order to have good laws, people have to follow them. It seems like one of those sorts of situations.
Well, that's right. And, you know, I'm not for the government knowing or doing things the government shouldn't do, but I do think you see a common pattern here where all these people have been identified. And frankly, you know, sometimes that doesn't even work, because I think at Virginia Tech, that person had been told not to come on the campus, who came on the campus and killed people.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But, you know, some of the worst shooting of kids, things in the world have happened in recent years in countries where you can't even have a gun.
Yeah.
Remember the camp?
Yes.
Was it Norway? Denmark. It was one of the Scandinavian countries. Sweden. And, you know, this guy goes to the camp, has a weapon. But obviously there's something wrong with people who do this.
Right.
And so what are we doing to try to either solve these problems for people or protect them in a way that protects the community by getting them the kind of treatment they need?
Absolutely. We'd love to have you stick around for another segment if you're interested.
You know, I've got to go to two other events this afternoon.
We understand. You're
I'm
popular
glad to be
today.
here with you. I'm glad we get to talk on the phone every once in a while.
Absolutely.
And thanks for letting me come by today.
Of course. Thank you very much. Senator Roy Blunt, it's a pleasure to have him back in the state of Missouri.